welcome to Easy Media. I'm Elaine. So today we have Nataniel Clementson here again. Thank you, Nataniel. Thank you for coming here again.
Thank you for having me, Elaine.
Okay, Nataniel, your wife, Kai, is still in the detention center. So if our friends, you have heard our last interview, and also a few days ago, I have an update by myself to update about how is Kai in the detention center. I talked to Kai's mom. So if you want to know what happened, then please go to watch our previous program. So today we have Nataniel here because Kai has just had a hearing. And from what I've received from your updates, the results of the hearing is not very pleasant. It's not what we are expecting or what we are praying for. Okay, so Nataniel, please let us know about the process, the results of the hearing. But before that, please tell us about the waiting process of this hearing. Because Kai has been detained for more than 2 months. And also she has to wait, and then she got one hearing date, but then it was postponed. It was postponed again and again. So please tell us about this waiting process, the reason being postponed, and then finally come to the hearing and what happened in the hearing. Okay, Nataniel, now
Sure.
the time is yours.
Yeah, procedurally, they've been quote unquote kicking the can down the road for quite some time. So, as far as it pertains to her individual merits hearing in particular, the initial date for that was postponed by 15 days because the ICE facility, according to the judge, failed to produce her in court. So his previous case ran for several hours, which is pretty typical of a merits court. So to begin with, it was a scheduling error on behalf of the court to schedule 2 people an hour apart. The person before her went almost 4 hours. And when we did ultimately have our individual merits court, it took about that same amount of time. So to only give people 1 hour between wasn't wise on their behalf to begin with. So by the time the
Nathaniel,
court was ready,
sorry,
sure.
Nathaniel, just one question, because in last interview, I also didn't ask you, where is the district of this detention center and the court? Where is the place?
So this would be District 5. This would be Texas, right? But as far as it operates right now, it is under the executive branch. It's not under the judicial branch. It's under the
Oh,
Department of Justice. And so right now it's just in immigration court.
I
And
see.
so the immigration court operates dependent of the rest of the Department of Justice and are entirely separate from it. And
Okay.
so as far as the procedural aspect, right? So by the time that judge was ready at her initial merits hearing, the ICE facility didn't have her prepared and waiting for that time. So by the time he was ready, she wasn't in the court. And he said because they failed to produce her at that time, even though realistically that would have only taken them 2 minutes to go in the other room and get her for the video hearing.
Hmm.
He said that they would continue it, and it was 15 days until her next scheduled date. So on the day of the next hearing, 15 days later, approximately 4 hours before it, the ICE detention center got word that, quote, the judge is not in the office today, end quote, and court did not commence. Beyond that, to begin with, they had 2 people scheduled for the same time slot that she was given that day, so we didn't even have reason to believe that it would go any different than her first court date. So that was postponed 4 more
Nathaniel,
days from there.
every postpone means she has to be detained for 15 more days and more days and more days. And I think one day there is not pleasant. So one day to her will be very long and to her family. And they give
Right.
not much of the valid reason, right?
No, they make no attempt to justify themselves. Like I said, the on the second instance of the court, she was told that, quote, the judge will not be in the office today, end quote. For all we know, he was gone fishing, right? They didn't give us any justification.
So for even a criminal, we have discussed it last time, they will have the right to be bailed out to be with the family while they are waiting for the hearing or for the court. But for Kai's case and the other ladies in the detention center, there's no way for them to be bailed out or to go home to have some time with the family. She just has to be there, wait and wait for no reason. Is that the case?
Considerably, yes. There's people in this country who literally murder and will get granted a bond for $50,000. There's girls in this detention facility who get a bond and it's $200,000 and they don't have a criminal offense. That's just for them to go home and see their family, and their crime is overstaying a visa or something of that nature, and it's being treated far more severely than heinous, serious, mortal crimes.
Yeah, I don't understand why. And if I were the ICE officer, I would want to clear the detention as soon as possible. So I have more
Mhm.
space, I have less trouble. So maybe you would explain to me the logic of just, keeping them here with no reason. Okay, so now
Well,
let's go to the next hearing. So how did
actually,
she
real quick, can
violate?
I answer that? So
Sure,
you
sure.
mentioned you mentioned the logic of keeping them there. Something that
Okay.
many people aren't aware of is that private prisons, private detention centers, private jails have contracts with the government that require a particular occupancy. And if they operate outside of that occupancy, they can actually fine the federal government or sue the federal government for a lot of money, right? They have contracts between 80 to 100% occupancy at all times. So the system benefits from the people being there beyond the commissary, beyond paying for communications. It's just like the school district, right? If the kids don't show up, the school makes less money. It's the exact same way in these private detention centers and these private prisons, etc.
Can I explain this as the reason they are arresting so many people and keep them in the detention center and not in a hurry for them to go to the hearing and for them to go home?
Of
It's
course, our
about the time.
lawmakers are privately invested in Geo Group and all these private prison complexes. So it absolutely is to their benefit to fill these centers, keep them full, to make new ones, and to expand upon the immigration detention system. They make more from them being there than being home on bond.
You mean the lawmakers, be it the congressmen, congresswomen, they invest in the private detention center where ICE arrested the people and keep them there. So there is a profit chain in it. They make the law and make the law might, give them interest, and then they can reinforce the law, which bring them more interest. But isn't there a conflict of interest? How is it be allowed or be performed so openly in US?
That's my question exactly, and that's something that myself and many US citizens have a dire grievance with today. It's that the things that we advocate for personally is not what our lawmakers advocate for us. The concept of a representative democracy is failing us. The things that we are standing for are not being upheld. Even our own constitution is not being upheld and trampled on. And I've documented at least 12 instances of that and pertains to my wife's case alone. And that's before we discuss the things far beyond that, such as conflicts of interest with how our government spends and how much our lawmakers make from these businesses they invest in that they personally profit from. For instance, even the flock cameras that are going around everywhere to surveil us. Many of our lawmakers are heavily invested in that company and just so happen to make millions of dollars, right? Donald Trump mandated that there's a new particular camera that the officers have to wear, and he made some ridiculous amount of $1 million off of forcing that mandate. And things like this just continue to abound and multiply in the government of the United States of America, unfortunately.
Okay, when it is about the profits, then it is things will turn to be more far further and further away from the justice. Because when you perform justice or when you reinforce justice, it might not bring you profits. But if you want profit and put profit before the justice, I guess eventually whom to suffer will be the people, will be the normal people, the civilians, or even the legal aliens. they will become, the victims or the people for them to gain profit from. And I can see, I can smell, seems like that is the case on Kai and the people whom she met in the detention center.
Right.
Okay, that is very sad. I guess this is not what you guys have voted for. A lot of people voted for ICE, for the Republican Party, for Donald Trump to have ICE to reinforce the immigration law. I think they didn't expect this type of conflict of interest and profit making. So
Right.
they're expecting a safe and just society. Okay, so let's come back to Kai's case. So she finally get to her hearing, which is after how many times of postponing?
So for the individual merits hearing, it was postponed twice, so it occurred on the third instance. Something similar happened with her master hearing. So, right,
Mm,
she was supposed to have her first master hearing, she was given an illegal and unconstitutional amount of time to prepare for. So, her first master hearing, she was detained on May 20th. She was given her notice to appear on May 23rd for a court date of May 26th. The federal requirement is 10 days. They only gave her three, which was over the weekend. One, how do you procure an attorney over the weekend? Second, the Monday that followed before that Tuesday was a federal holiday itself. It was Memorial Day. So with that being said, she had realistically no opportunity to procure counsel. It was only through the grace of God that we got an attorney. It was actually a man that founded one branch of our church. Our church is three churches that merged, and one of those churches was founded by the gentleman that is actually our attorney now. And so he rallied to her cause and actually served her pro bono initially for that first master hearing, where he was able to enter and tell the court that this was unlawful, and they continued it by a week. So in a continuance, she was only given the legal requirement of time. She wasn't even afforded additional time that a continuance is supposed to provide you beyond the initial 10 days. So then when she went to her second master hearing on June 2nd, um, she had another one that followed because at that court, the judge went and ruled on her despite not having all of the evidence on record and claiming to not have all the evidence that was submitted to the record. And so they were supposed to have a following court for that, in which by that time that judge was removed from the court. According to we were given no reason by the system, right? But according to the ICE detention facility workers that were just speculating when talking to my wife, they themselves claimed to believe that it was because the judge was too nice. So she proceeded to have a third master hearing, right, in which the judge was considerate of all the evidence and appeared to have all the evidence and claimed to. And then she had a fourth master hearing in which she was able to file her um, what is it called? Her application for non-removal based on Convention Against Torture because her mother is highly involved in the underground church in China, and her family, including my wife, has experienced in severe persecution that harms them both physically and emotionally to this day. So they had four master hearings before she was then had to wait another month just to have that next merit hearing be delayed three or two times and occur on the third instance. So she's been there over 70 days now. And now we have 30 days to appeal, and then we have no idea how long that process will be. They could confirm her appeal, and I don't believe they have any requirement for when they have to follow through on that appeal.
So when you say she's given 30 days to appeal, that means the result of this hearing is not good. That is the result that she needs to appeal about. So what is the
Yeah.
result? Is the case against her? Because last time there wasn't a very clear explanation about her arrest. So what
Mhm.
exactly was the case against her?
So the case they're claiming against her is that her student visa was out of status, and they're trying to fight to get her removed despite our pending marriage-based application. So with that being said, right, they're fighting to get her removed, and they're fighting to get her removed against her current application. So her current application is against non-removal against the convention for the Convention Against Torture. And so the entire case at our merits hearing was predicated upon that. So we were presenting the evidence as to persecution my wife has experienced. For instance, when she was in high school, the school teachers threatened her and my mother-in-law that if they didn't renounce their Christian faith and stop professing their Christian faith, that they would go to quote any means necessary to enforce that. Following that, my wife was bullied severely. Her hair was pulled, she was punched, she was kicked, and in one instance, she was dragged by her hair by the teacher's assistants down the flight of stairs to the schoolyard where they proceeded to attempt to humiliate her. My mother-in-law was on the premises when this occurred, and she was a witness to that and testified to that. In the court, they attempted to conflate that instance with another instance where a girl punched and kicked my wife. They attempted to make that out to be a fight that my wife got into, even though she was the one who was assaulted and did not retaliate physically. They conflated these two instances and made them to be about the same person. There was a third instance where it was that same individual who was known in the school to be operating on behalf of the teacher to do the teacher's dirty work. And so ultimately, they basically conflated three different instances of time into one account, despite that being documented thoroughly on the record. There's been instances where their home was broken into. My mother-in-law was drugged, and they did that to try to get information about the underground Chinese church out of her. They claimed that that was irrelevant to my wife, and that despite her home being broken into, that occurrence was to my mother-in-law and wasn't relevant to my wife, despite documentation that my wife serves her mother's ministry and has, and that would put her in line of receiving such heinous enforcement action upon them to renounce their faith or to reveal information that would harm the underground church in China. They claimed that that wasn't relevant to her. There was my father-in-law's pension has been withheld from him, and quote from the perpetrator, the Chinese government, that if he did not bring them back to China, that further things would happen to him. They again claim that that has nothing to do with the probability or the likelihood of her personally receiving any type of torture. And what's crazy is when it comes to Convention Against Torture, I know the title is severe, but under the requirements for that, it's not just physical harm, it's the restriction of the loss of someone's freedoms. So the restriction of the loss of her freedoms would be are well documented on the evidentiary record. 100 members of her church at home in China were arrested in one coordinated sting on July 11th of this year. They again claimed that that was irrelevant to her, and the court claimed that that had nothing to do with her and that these were only high level people and that she is not a high level person in the church. And then after all of the sworn testimony, after all the affidavits and all of these things, right, after our documents that we submitted to the court extensively, they proceeded to just say that, oh, well, why didn't you have pictures of her serving in ministry here? Why didn't you report this to the police in China as if the government there wasn't the issue? So
What?
they just, right, they just
The police in
marginalized
China?
everything. Right.
That
You
was
did you
done by the
report this to the
police.
school? Right. The school was the issue. Why would they report this to the school? And so they were saying, well, why is there not medical documentation of this? Medical documentation from China that my father-in-law would have to submit through the Chinese firewall, that would be a conflict of for his safety to communicate with us. Why is there no statements for my father-in-law for that same reason, right? And they were just oblivious to these very obvious facts that were for their safety and just conflated everything and marginalized it down into just being far more small than these 500 something pages I believe we had submitted to the court for that.
Um, as you have just now you have explained that it's not a district court. That is it considered a federal court or a
It
state court?
it wouldn't technically be considered a federal court yet.
It's a state
Um,
court.
So it's not a federal or a state court. In an aspect, it's a federal court, but it's not the Supreme Court, right? So it is not a higher court because it isn't underneath the Department of Justice. So or excuse me, the judicial branch. The Department of Justice is what it is called. It is underneath the executive branch. So it's underneath the president. And so were this appeal to get denied, which they denied her bond appeal, even though at her bond hearing, they claimed to not have all of the evidence that was submitted to the evidentiary record and proceeded to rule on her regardless, which, as far as I'm aware and concerned, is a due process violation. Um, we applied for an appeal on that bond decision based on the what's called a change in circumstance, even though that was pertaining to the lack of evidence being available to the court at the first time. And that was denied. All right. So it's very rare that in the immigration court, the Court of Appeals overrules the decision of a judicial officer, especially nowadays where the system is just so crammed and overloaded. So uh, if that appeal were to not go through, then we would have to escalate it to higher courts. So first, that would be district court, which is not just the state of Texas. If I'm not mistaken, that's like Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas. I know for sure Texas and Arkansas. I don't know if it's three or four states that are within that. And then if that doesn't go through, then we would have to escalate this to Supreme Court, which would give us the opportunity to actually change legislation through her case were they to rule in her favor.
The reason I ask, because it sounded very ridiculous what the court has argued about, Kai's case, her persecution in China, as if they know nothing about the persecution of Christian in China. Recently, there was just a very well-known Chinese pastor being released from jail, and he came to U.S.,
Mhm.
Pastor Jing Mingri. And so there are many of his coworkers, his church coworkers, they are still in jail, still
Mhm.
in China. So everyone, it is an open secret. Everyone knows that how Christians can be persecuted in China. Maybe in different province, in different places, under different policy, they will be treated differently. But um, as law enforcement people or as a judge, to talk about, oh, this is irrelevant. Oh, this persecution is irrelevant. And why didn't they call the police? The police are to execute the persecution all the time. And when they make a police report, why don't they show the medical report? It sounds very, very ignorant. So it
Right.
is unthinkable that a court will make such ignorance remarks. That's why I want to know what kind of court is that. Okay,
Right.
so what are you going to do within this month that you have 1 month to make the appeal? How are you going to make the appeal to where and what are you expecting?
Sure. So the first thing that I've done is I've reached out to my congressman because I'm aware, thanks to a friend of mine from Taiwan, that your congressman is able to appeal on your behalf. He actually had an instance in time where he was given a removal order and had 30 days to leave the country. Um, I, it actually turned out that his documents were lost. The court had literally lost his documents, and that's what had led to that. And so he was able to reach out to his congressman and get this corrected and was able to have them appeal on his behalf. So this morning, I wrote an extensive email to them and was able to submit that. We have our attorney preparing an appeal. If that were to not go through, right, the conventional route would be to go through our attorney to get that filed within 30 days. He's supposed to be meeting with Kai again tomorrow, and he'll be meeting with my mother-in-law and I on Sunday. In the meanwhile, I'm just hoping and praying and preparing myself as much as I can for the best and for the worst. I'm developing my online businesses so that in the event that my family were to need to relocate to another country, I would have USD coming into my bank virtually and not just from my in-person labors and efforts, um, so that
Mm.
we would be able to be provided for in that time. I'm pushing a fundraiser to help with our legal fees, because I know that uh, throughout this process, I've felt strongly that my wife's case can be something that changes how these courts operate for other people, whether that's
Oh.
because her story goes viral and lawmakers see it and hear it, or because we end up on the news, or because we were to have to escalate all the way to Supreme Court. Because I strongly believe in the sovereignty of marriage, and if someone has a clean record and has an ongoing marriage-based change of status, why are we separating families? What are we accomplishing here other than lining the pockets of private prison owners and investors?
Yeah, to your case, your appeal will, I can hear you will heavily focus on her status of being a Christian and will be heavily persecuted in China. But beside that, actually, your marriage, I think, is also a pretty strong argument because, yeah, maybe she didn't completely honor her student visa for certain reason, but in that process, you already got married. Marriage is also a very strong bond, and it's a strong case that she can stay here to to maintain the marriage and to have a family. So I can see this case, Kai's case, is actually pretty strong. I didn't even expect that this hearing will turn out to be this result. I was actually pretty optimistic about the results of the hearing. Did you expect this
Yeah.
hearing?
So I've felt the same way about every single hearing so far. Like it really bewilders me. Even as I got to be a witness to the court on the merit hearing, the prosecutor made a terrible argument. She resorted to semantics. She was trying to ask questions to force my wife and my mother-in-law into a corner so that they would accidentally say something the wrong way, or she would
Oh,
ask these close-ended questions that were essentially like, so if this is that, then that didn't happen, right? And it would be like, well, part of that is true, but part of that is untrue. But you gave a yes or no answer to something that has two conflicting answers. Fortunately, my wife and my mother-in-law are savvy and we're aware of that. And um, the judge even appeared to be irritated by the prosecutor. Like there was times where he didn't let her ask further questions that he gave our attorney the opportunity to. He spoke more positively to our attorney than the prosecutor. Um, he took more notes during my wife's testimony and questioning than the counter questioning. And it just very well seemed to me like there was no way. Like it just very well seemed it was in my wife's favor. But then we got to that final hour and the judge said, Miss Lee, I am
um,
going to not approve your application. And we were all flustered. It was such a shock.
I truly don't understand because she does not take welfare, I guess. So she does not spend the taxpayers' money. She does not cause any danger to the society. She does not bring any negative effect to the society. I don't see any, and she's not an illegal alien. So I don't see any reason. Is there any political reason or any policy or profit that make them lead them into this decision? Otherwise, I can't explain, the whole logic behind.
Yeah. So the profit aspect is definitely a given. As
But
far as the policy aspect, I feel like that correlates with the profit aspect, but on a private level for the judges. So something that not many people are aware of is the fact that when Donald Trump entered the office for his second term, one of his first orders of business was to fire all the immigration judges whose politics he wasn't in line with or whose approval rate was quote unquote too high. So our judge was not an immigration judge prior to this current season. Prior to April of this year, he was not an immigration judge. He was not a judge at all, and
Oh,
he did not practice immigration law. He was a JAG. He was an Air Force assistant to a judge, and for a brief time. And then prior to that, he was just an attorney for the Air Force for a long time.
oh,
So, right, these immigration judges all got fired, and then they got replaced with temporary judges who aren't as qualified as the people that were removed.
oh, okay. So as the policy, are they instructed to be as straight as possible or cannot be too nice? Because when the judge is being too nice, he'll be transferred out. So, so the policy requires them to be strict. Is that the case?
Sure, the policy requires them to be strict, and then the unspoken or the unwritten aspect of that is that if their approval gets beyond a number that is not fixed, then, oh no, if my approval rate gets too high, I'm gonna be out of a job. So, oh, I don't know if I can find a way to deny this, I'm going to find a way to deny this, appears to be how many of them operate. As we've already seen, we've had a judge get removed during our process dealing with them.
Are there any quotas that they have to reject, like so and so, how many people, and they are not allowed to, to accept too many people? Are there any quota? Do you know that?
I'm not conscious of that as I am conscious of things of like quotas for the facility having a certain percentage of occupancy. I don't know if there are quotas. That's a great question for me to do my research on, but I do know for a fact that judges were fired based upon having too many, too much, too high of an approval rating in their rulings prior to the Trump administration in the second term.
You know, Nathaniel, when Trump, I did notice about Trump firing a lot of judges, some district judges, and all the. I thought the reason was they're being too lenient to the criminals. And also, during Biden's administration, they let in a lot of illegal immigrants without vetting. And
Right.
the judges are also very, very lenient to the illegal aliens. Uh, a lot of fake asylum seekers, a lot of potential criminals and potential even terrorists will be just coming in. So if those judges they make the judgment not depend on the constitution, but being overemphasized on human rights, saying that no human is illegal. That kind of judge, I think, okay, they are not very qualified to be judged because if you claim that no human is illegal, then you don't know what legal is about. But then, and not to another end, if now the judges, we are expecting you also to make judgment according to the Constitution and immigration law, and if possible, to provide refuge for the people who are facing persecution in their own country. So if you do make the judgment according to the law, I think such thing will not happen. So seems like now we are in US, things are shifting from one end to another end, from one extreme to another extreme. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, and that's typically what we see happen in American politics, right? It's usually a left or right or a red or blue thing. We've never seen a libertarian or a third party come in and win and focus on our liberty or focus on what's sound in the middle of the spectrum, right? I totally understand correcting the ills of the previous administration. I totally agree that it was unwise of them to just let anyone come in willy-nilly and just open borders, and that is not wise economically. That's not wise for our safety. I totally understand and acknowledge that. But on the other side, they're not just treating people who entered illegally like this. They're not just treating people who are criminals like this. They're treating everyone and their mama, as it is said, uh, as if they are guilty, as if they are unsafe, as if they are the worst of the worst. And this type of rhetoric and ideology is a social weapon. It
Mm-mm.
is not being used
Exactly.
for the sake of justice.
Exactly. I can see from some of our the comments of my previous program about Kai's situation in the detention center. A lot of people, they are so partisan that they don't really care about the law being lawful or the justice. What they care about is which side are you on? If I'm on the
Right.
right side, I'm on the conservative side, then I would just cite the ICE judge for whatever they do. And if I'm on the left side, then I will just cite the previous judge, whatever the judgment they made. So this is kind of sad because whichever side you shift to, eventually it's the common people who will suffer. If you're on the extreme left side, you let in the criminals, the illegal criminals, then the normal people will suffer because they will become the victim of the violence of the illegal criminals. And now people like Kai and a lot of friends she met in the detention center, and like you or Kai's mom, you becomes the people who suffer. So either
Right.
way, there are people who suffer and there are people who making profit. Isn't it quite a sad scenario nowadays? Is there any way out?
I would love to believe that there's a way out that could come before Jesus does, right? Um, I cannot say that for certain. We can only hope, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's tragic. We have policies such as children that are born in the United States or U.S. citizen, but then there's no protection for that parent. So then there's no protection from that child ending up in child protective services and just becoming another number somewhere. There's no protection to keep families together, even though Congress over time has continued to advocate for the sovereignty of marriage and the sovereignty of life. Yet, and that's the right side of the political spectrum that's ruling on this, right? But then those same people then fail to protect these lives and to advocate for these lives, and then a lot of funding or even just time spent in the judicial process that could go towards these things go towards funding things that aren't in the interest of these lives and are in the private interest of the lawmakers. And the system is just very corrupt at every level. And, this is something that has already been prophesied in Revelation. And so ultimately, it's no surprise. It is unfortunate. It is tragic. We can hope for change. We can hope for some type of reform. But at this point, I don't know what that looks like because the corruption is just so deeply entrenched that right now it appears that, and for quite some time, it appears that our government and our lawmakers are more focused on foreign interest than on we the people.
Yeah, seems like there's only one thing, which is the most bipartisan thing, which is the corruption. It is so bipartisan that both party you can see corruption in different ways. Yeah, and then okay, so now you have 1 month. Kai has 1 month to make the appeal. And in this 1 month time, will she be still in the detention center or will she be allowed to go home with you?
Oh, most definitely. And that's just such an unfortunate aspect of this is because if she was granted a bond at any time, one, she would have been home this whole time, but that would have afforded us the time for our marriage-based change of status to finalize. And then none of this would have had to ensue. And so, because that was in place, as far as I'm aware of how due process operates in my own research, she should have been afforded that opportunity to come home on bond back on June 1st, but was denied. She was deemed a flight risk despite 17 notarized affidavits attesting to the fact that she simply wanted home in her community with her husband. She was, again, as far as I understand the process, unlawfully ruled as a flight risk by, again, a new immigration judge, a temporary immigration judge, someone who did not practice immigration law prior and has to come make these decisions and ensure his job security based off of what percentage of people he allows or doesn't allow, if any at all.
Um, So it means that is she home now, or she still need to be? Is she still in the detention center now?
She will remain in the detention center for the duration of this process and at no point will be afforded to come home. That would have only been possible if she were to have gotten bond or if she were to have been returned home and her Convention Against Torture application would have been approved on the 28th.
That is, I think that is mentally kind of a torture also. And also, I think the detention center is not a very pleasant place to stay. Although, from Kai's mother, I realized that God is using her to spread gospel, to spread love in the center, which is really to God's grace. Really, all glory to God. God is using
Right.
her to do good thing in the ugly scenario. Well, nevertheless, it is still a very unpleasant thing to stay in the detention center. And also, her situation is not very good. She's just been sick and she's not having very good diets, right? And also,
Yeah.
she can't even get what she wants. Like you have told me about she has to buy everything, really everything from the detention center, right?
Yeah. And they even don't have clothing detergent. They have to use their shampoo to wash their clothes. And like it's been crazy. If they're ill or if they're hurt, that usually gets marginalized by the quote unquote doctors there. As far as I'm aware, they're not really doctors. They're like nurses at best. And they have to really fight and stand up for themselves just to get basic medical care. There was a point where she almost lost her contacts and was wearing the same pair for like a week because she was waiting just to get contact solution, which is unsafe for her eyes. People go blind from that, right? And yeah, we had reason to believe that she was pregnant prior to going into the facility, and now we have reason to believe that she is not. She hasn't been attended to as far as that's concerned either. And so it's all really tragic and unfortunate.
And she couldn't get blanket, like some basic necessity, blankets to keep her warm, clothes to keep her warm. And as a Christian, she needs to read Bible. Can she get her Bible? And she wants to write diary. Does she get a pen and a book to write her diary? Like, does she get any basic necessities?
She had to spend $25 to get a Bible on commissary because they didn't let us give her hers. She had to buy a pen on commissary. Our pastor, who, as far as again, as far as I'm aware that the law operates, clergy visits are a required, available necessity. He was denied to even bring his Bible in the facility when he went to visit her. You
That
know,
sounds
it's
like a
crazy.
China. That sounds like a China prison.
Yeah. My mom tried to mail her a blanket when she was sick, and that was denied. And so she was in there with a fever. She was cold. She was shivering. And the best she could do was just buy more socks to wear multiple pairs of socks at once and to buy a little beanie to put on her head to stay warm. And she was just in there chattering her teeth, you know?
Is there any warm jacket for her to put on?
I mean, they have like a sweatshirt. It's about as thick as the shirt that I'm wearing over my button up here, but that's about it.
Even inmates, they get some basic human rights. And I know a lot of girls, like from Kai's mom, who told me some girls are already there for a year. I can't imagine in a year of time how much they have to spend if they want more decent food and if they want some basic necessities. And I think to the mental health, talking about human rights, it is unthinkable that all these things are happening, not just in US, but Texas. It's a place that we think it is more reasonable. It is run by a Republican governor. It is a more reasonable place. It's a red state. So I don't understand, or now, is it only in red states or in Texas? Is it more strict than other maybe Democratic states?
Maybe to some extent, that would be the case, but this system operates entirely under the Department of Justice. So
Oh.
it's under the president's foot, basically. So he rules how this operates. So even in places that historically are considered sanctuary cities where people are supposed to be able to operate as asylees,
Yeah.
basically, it's still happening there, you know?
Oh.
So there's really no protection or provision from this, regardless of the political leanings of where you are. It's outside of your local government's jurisdiction, which, again, as far as I'm aware, is not how the law legally should operate according to our Constitution and the laws that are ratified.
To your knowledge, how many detention centers are there in the whole country? Do you know that? And how many people were under detention? Do you know that?
I actually I don't know that. I would be willing to bet that it's hundreds. Or there's 50 states. There's at least several in every state, so we could very well say it's hundreds. I know within the last year, like it's millions of cases that have gone through. So in order to have the space for that, I would imagine that there's quite an abundance of them. And in cases where they don't have them, they just send these people to jails and to prisons and create space for them there.
But for those detention centers, they are all profit-based. They are all considered private detention center, and they work together with the justice system, justice department, and there is still like all of them will have some profit link, right?
Yeah, yeah. So when facilities are needed, it's not something the government would go make. That's I'm trying to remember the legal term for that, but essentially to avoid our government monopolizing industries, they bid on it. So then these companies will come in and they'll make a bid to produce these facilities, or they will already own one, and then there will be a bid for space for inmates. And so it is entirely a market-based decision on when and where these facilities are and who owns them.
Government is not supposed to be a profit-making entity, especially the judiciary department. If it links to profit, it is very hard to run independently and totally for justice. So this is a very dangerous signal to me that a democratic country is running their judiciary system based on profits, or at least it linked to profit making. This is something really not a good sign for the people, at least. And I don't believe this is anything that the voters voted for. I'm sure the voter voted for a safe community and then to reinforce the law,
Mm.
also include the immigration law. But everything has to base on justice and the Constitution. I don't think anyone would have expected this, right?
Not at all. Not
Mhm.
at all. Historically, I've considered myself to be more middle of the spectrum, but more leaning towards the conservative side. And I still feel like my values are rooted in that as a Christian, but just this far extreme level of um, our system being weaponized to such an extent that it it's almost unspeakable. There's aspects of it that are just outrageous. We're in foreign wars and our people are being surveilled, our families are being torn apart. None of this is what the people voted for when they voted in our president. Our president was voted in for safer communities and for no foreign wars and for a better
Exactly.
economy.
Yes.
And our people are afraid of the government. Our people are afraid of being surveilled. They're afraid that if they speak out too much, that they'll be silenced. Our people are afraid that their family will be torn apart, or that even U.S. citizens end up getting detained by ICE because the color of their skin and that person fails to produce proof that they're a U.S. citizen in that moment. They just get whisked on away by ICE and they're in a detention facility and have to prove themselves, right? Even my own boss, there was a point where he was detained for 21 days, even though he has a work permit and owns a business and operates business. and had to spend $20,000 on a lawyer just to get out of that situation, even though he was here rightfully and has been here rightfully. It's just really ridiculous, and it's just costing our people so greatly in both their emotional well-being and comfort and safety, as well as the financial aspect.
Also, some people lost money, and the saddest thing is some people lost life. When I have checked that the within this 1 over years, the people who was shot to death by ICE officers, there were altogether 10. Last time I thought there was 9, and then I updated myself. I look at AI to update myself. It was 10. 10 people were shot dead. Well, I would say during when they were enforcing their law, sometimes when their life is being threatened, I can understand they would have to do it for self-defense because people can be very unfriendly also. They are facing danger themselves also.
Mm.
But there was a case that there was this young father who is from Colombia. I think he's 26 years old, and in front of his 3-year-old daughter, he was shot to death. And I just think sometimes this is excessive violence. It is unnecessary. And also, I
Oh
don't know,
yeah.
a detention center. So I have talked about this shooting cases in my last program, but I want to know about this detention center because I'm sure there will be some mental illness and a lot of depression or anxiety if you are being detained for so long, especially when they feel that there is no justice. So, do you know about the case, the death, or some severe cases in the detention center?
Not in hers specifically. Fortunately, there's been injuries there. One of her good friends that she's brought to Christ while she was in there, uh, uses a walker and at one point uses a wheelchair because they had this elderly woman on a top bunk. Terrible decision. And eventually one day she fell and hurt herself and has struggled with her mobility since. As far as death in detention centers, last time I looked at the statistics, it was like 50 within the last year or something.
50.
Yeah,
The reason?
yeah.
Was there the reason of the death? Cause of the death?
There's illnesses like most of a large portion of the detention center that my wife is in were all ill recently. And as far as I can understand it, it was COVID because they were losing their sense of smell and their taste on the other side of it and things like that. And so these
Oh,
pathogens are running rampant. People get injured. People don't get their medical care. Imagine being someone who was on chemo and now you're in a ICE detention center. You don't even get to finish running your course. There's people who go in on serious antibiotics who aren't able to get procure their medicine and then don't get to finish their cycle and then that has complications, right? So there's so many different scenarios that could lead to this number of deaths and as far as we've seen, there's people who also die at the hands of an ICE officer who does not receive repercussions for that death, even though that person was a nonviolent offender towards them. I mean, we've even seen instances where people who were just um, civilians recording a moment of, brutality from a federal officer were then turned around and killed. For instance, I don't remember the woman's name, but there was a woman who was filming in her car, and the ICE agents went from aggressing the person they were detaining to aiming their weapons at this woman, and she tried to drive away. And from the side, they shot and killed her and claimed it's because she was attacking them with her vehicle, even though she was not driving towards them. She was fleeing, right? And so it just makes me wonder why this happens too, because I can't take my phone in to visit my wife. I can only visit her through a glass wall. And it's like, are y'all afraid that I'm gonna document that and that people are gonna just see how awful this is? Like, why are y'all so afraid of being documented when we the people have
and
every right to do so?
and according to your mom-in-law, that every time after you call her, you have to pay for the phone call, right?
Oh yeah, we spend like $20 a day on communications. If it weren't for the people donating to our fundraiser on top of our legal fees and everything, like I don't know how we would get to talk to her every day. We also
That's
haven't heard from her in over 36 hours. We have no idea about the state of her well-being at this moment.
that's such exploiting. by just making a phone call. You have to pay $20. Maybe not one phone call, but you have to talk to your wife. This is also a basic necessity, and they're making profit out of that. And
Right.
also, Nathaniel, is this enough being reported? Like what you say, you're not even allowed to bring in a phone. And I can see from self-media, from mainstream media, I don't see much cases reported, especially in the detention center. That's why, like a small platform like me, when I report this, people they can't believe that. Seems like I'm the one only few voices to talk about that. And there are some small voices talking about that. But I don't
Yeah.
really see big reporting about the detention center doing this. It's like even Democrat Party, if you are a partisan situation, if the Republican Party are doing these things, not looking very good, it seems like the Democrat Party are also not reporting it, not having some balance in it. What is the reason being such being this negligence?
So it all goes back to the profit aspect and the surveillance aspect of just how things operate. So part of it's fear, right? There's going to be people with big platforms that are afraid to lose those platforms for speaking out. And I've heard of people that had millions of followers that go to speak about things like this and then gets shut down. As far as even you're aware, you have a pro Zoom subscription, but our call randomly shut off a little while ago, right? And it only makes me wonder,
That could be
you
the
know,
reason. Yeah.
yeah. And so part of it is definitely fear. Part of it is a profiteering aspect. There's the media companies are all owned by billionaires who have invested interest in certain things, right? There's certain names of the people that own those entities that I don't even want to mention in this video for the sake of your channel not getting demonetized on this video or the video not getting shown to more people, right? And so it's the same way with the news agencies. There's certain names that if they mention on air, they'll just shut off being on air and or cut that person off. And so the news is going to report what's in their benefit, and then the people on our voices on our platforms that are nowhere near as large are having to fight just to get that exposure and to not have our voices silenced in the event of seeking that exposure. And so that's why many people haven't heard of these things. The algorithm is only going to show us what we have shown ourselves to see, right? After all of this has occurred with my wife and I've done more research, my algorithm's starting to show me more people speaking out against this. I see people who are saying a lot and are being bold, but I never saw that prior to this, right? And so
Mhm.
part of it is the social dilemma of how these algorithms operate and of how the legacy media operates, and the truth doesn't get its opportunity to fully propagate under these systems.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I can see the reason. In my last episode about talking about Kai's case, my conclusion is we are only truly being loved by God. Only God truly loves us, little people, common people. The politicians or the media people, they can talk very loud, they can talk with big words and make a lot of promises, but turn out once they are in power, they forget about the promises and they forget about the little people. They forget about the citizens' need. They
Mhm.
just try to seize the power and use the power to turn into money to profitize themselves.
That's
And
very true. It's not just that though, because I don't think in all those cases there's people that go in and they're just evil people. They're like they get persuaded by wealth and power and fame. I do know that is a very well documented, concerted effort to suppress these people and to control these people. And so there are people that go into these positions of power that mean well who end up getting extorted to operate outside of what they believe to be righteous, or else, right? And I won't go too much into that because that's not the topic of today's discussion, but it's well documented and is one of the largest social dilemmas of in the United States right now.
hmm, yeah, so I have this feeling that we are just like orphan, like what Jesus said, we are like orphan without God. But I'm very happy that you, Kai, and Kai's mom are very godly people. So Kai is under like great deal of injustice, but then she is protected by God and she is used by God, to spread gospel and love in the detention center. So how do you want us now to support you?
Hmm.
People can do that through your platform to donate money and also by prayer. So how do you want us to pray for Kai and how are you going to depend on God, depend on the Holy Spirit to walk the rest of the journey?
Yeah. Yeah, as far as prayer is concerned, prayer for her well-being and her safety, like
Mm-hmm.
right now, I haven't gotten to talk to her for over a day and a half, which is rare. There's times where they threaten that they'll take away their communications for everyone if one person continues to misbehave or things like they treat it like the schoolyard in there. So really just her well-being, like I know that just because she's not talking to me right now for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that she's unsafe, right? So I just have to trust God. So just her well-being, for
Mm-hmm.
her mental health,
Yes.
um, and I don't really just want prayers for her in her case and her deliverance. I really want prayers for our nation, for the
Yes.
sovereignty of marriage, for families to be reunited, for legislation to change to make sure that en masse families aren't being separated, mothers and fathers and sisters and sons and wives and husbands aren't being torn from their homes, from their communities. Because this isn't just a grievance to myself,
Yes.
to my mother-in-law, it's a grievance to her father, it's a grievance to my parents, it's a grievance to everyone who loves and knows us, everyone in our church who knows and loves her, everyone who's expecting to see her come back to sing on the stage on Sunday that doesn't see her there. There's hundreds of people that are affected by just my wife's case alone, right? And this at scale really hampers, I believe is the right word, the spirit of the people, right? It's it's something that takes away from our hope. And so really just hope for the people, that change can happen and that better days are ahead. Um, and really that's like been the biggest thing for me lately. Like I've come to realize part of the reason this has happened was one, for me to learn to be happy, regardless of the circumstances, but also to be an encouragement regardless of the circumstances. And I just really would love to see that for our society.
Yeah, very thankful. Very good to see that you're still in good spirit. You're in a very positive manner, positive spirit. I think these are the manner of the people who has God, who has faith in God. So whatever happen, whatever situations and how injustice we are facing, we still have faith in God. I can see that in you. I can see that in Kai's mom, and I'm sure Kai is under God's protection. She's also having this positive spirit, and very thankful for that. So we'll continue to pray for you and pray for Kai and pray for US, pray for the world. My prayer is always in this dark situation, more people will look up to God because for people in China, of course, there are great darkness, big prosecution in China, and people are looking at America as the beacon, but actually the true light has to come from above. That we should not have any idol or any unrealistic expectation on earth. Everywhere is, can be controlled by the darkness, and
Right.
our only the hope of light is from above. So this is my prayer. In the dark time, more people will come to Jesus, more people will be saved, and get and know what the eternity is about. Because on earth, everything is temporary. Even be it the country, be it the citizenship, being the nationality, it is all temporary. We are in a temporal world. So I think people should look at the eternity, look up and trust in God, and we can overcome everything.
Yeah,
Okay, Neil, thank you very much for your sharing. And we heard a lot. It is all very important. Thank you very much and hope all the best to you and for Kai.
sure thing. Can I share one more thing? All
Sure.
right, you had asked me about the prayer aspect and then like
Hmm.
what can we do?
Yeah.
I'm not really pushing the petition as much anymore because I'm at a point now where I just really question how effective that is. but what I do believe will be very effective will be the court proceedings, especially were this to escalate to higher courts. So if anyone were to have a heart for our case or to believe that it could make change, I would request that if they would be willing to donate to our GoFundMe, that helps us be able to sustain our fight and not, run out of the opportunity to do so because of lack of resources.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you for sharing, and thank all the audience for walking this journey together with us. Okay, so I'm Elaine. Thank you, everyone, and this is Easy Media. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.